Before I begin, I want to admit that from current events, it looks like I was wrong about Trump and Russia. I didn't expect such pro-peace movements from Trump. I was expecting it would go more with ultimatums for Russia, as we saw a few times. But lately, events are happening quite fast. Nevertheless, until a peace agreement is signed, nothing is for sure. On February 18th, Russia and the USA met with each other to discuss the first draft of negotiations in Ukraine. For the first time since the beginning of war in Ukraine, both sides of the war are meeting each other. This meeting showed everyone's real faces. While Trump is trying to leave Biden's project Ukraine in NATO, European leaders make statements about prolonging the war. Ursula von der Leyen. Today in Paris, we confirmed that Ukraine deserves peace through strength. A peace that respects its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, with strong security guarantees. Europe is providing its full share of military assistance to Ukraine. At the same time, we need increased defense in Europe. Britain is ready to send its troops to Ukraine if necessary to ensure the country's security, says Prime Minister Starmer. From the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Europeans and Biden's USA were talking about the fight between democracy and the free world with tyrants and dictators. No more lies anymore. European politicians need war and only war because, as we talked about it many times, they have nothing to offer to European voters. They destroy Europe economically and politically, weakening it so the USA gets all the best companies with factories, while it can become a monopolist in the European gas market. The EU wants to organize a €700 billion aid package for Ukraine. This was stated by the German Foreign Minister Baerbock on the sidelines of the Munich meeting. According to Bloomberg, European officials are working on a new large-scale project to support Kiev. According to some resources, we are talking about billions of dollars to purchase weapons from the United States, but Baerbock hinted at a completely different scale, about €700 billion. A normal European voter needs to ask one simple question. With what money is the EU preparing to militarize Europe? EU diplomacy chief Kaja Kallas said in Munich that the EU should reallocate some resources to ensure that Ukraine continues its military action. We are now at the critical point where the Ukrainians have decided they will fight back, and the only thing that is asked of us is to reallocate some resources to help them fight back, so that we don't have to worry about the war here in this beautiful place. I really want to dedicate myself to this. Meanwhile, Russia and the US delegations completed talks in Riyadh. The talks between Russia and the US went well, said Russian presidential aide Ushakov. Russia and the US agreed to take each other's interests into account. According to him, it's difficult to say that Russia and the US are getting closer, but there was a conversation about it. The most important question is, what do Trump and Putin want from these negotiations? For Putin, it was simple from the beginning. Ukraine is not in NATO. Later on, Russia conquered territories in Ukraine, connecting Crimea with land. Even in that case, Russia was willing to give them back to Kiev, but Zelensky, with the support of Biden and Johnson, rejected that offer. Now Zelensky has a worse draft of the agreement in his hands. As for Trump, he wants to leave this highly costly project. He has two options: bring peace as he promised, or leave it on the shoulders of Europe. How can he bring peace? Ukraine has to reject the possibility of being a part of NATO and forget its lost territory. The second option is to leave it on the shoulders of Europe. If Trump does it right away, Democrats' propaganda machine will attack Trump to destroy him. That's why the best option for Trump is to have a negotiation, meet with Putin, discuss all possibilities, and then say, Russia is ready. But then Zelensky, together with the EU, will state that they disagree and will continue the war. Then Trump will shrug his shoulders and say, I did what I could, and leave Ukraine on the shoulders of Europe. Europe, to compensate the US, will start spending more money on weapons, weakening its economic potential and forcing companies to move to the US. Meanwhile, Trump can focus on China. Dictator Zelensky, who cancelled elections, already said that he will not accept this meeting's results. Ukraine knew nothing about the talks in Saudi Arabia and will not recognize them, said Zelensky. Even before that, if an agreement is made behind our backs, it simply won't work, because any agreement, any arrangement requires the Europeans to implement this agreement. You need the Ukrainians to implement this agreement, said the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas. In other words, the EU will not accept any peace. The EU needs war. After Ursula tweeted that post about peace through strength in Ukraine, a few hours later, Russian and American officials gave conferences regarding their meeting. These are American comments. Ending the war in Ukraine will require consciousness from all sides. US Secretary of State Rubio said in response to a question about lifting Western sanctions against Russia. The EU must be at the negotiating table at some point, as it imposed sanctions against Russia. Trump wants to end the conflict fairly and not allow it to resume in 2-3 years. Ending the conflict is possible only with the consent of all parties. The conditions must be acceptable. The future of negotiations on Ukraine will be determined by the willingness of the parties to keep their promises. This will be shown in the coming weeks. Ending the war in Ukraine will open the way for Russia and the US to cooperate in economics and geopolitics. Working to end the conflict in Ukraine will require complex and intense diplomacy for a long time. Russian Minister of Foreign Policy Sergei Lavrov held his conference. We not only listened but also heard each other. Russia and the US will ensure the earliest possible appointment of ambassadors. The appearance of troops from the same NATO countries but under a foreign flag, the EU flag or a national flag, is unacceptable. Zelensky's entire team needs to be brought to reason, and he himself needs to be slapped on the wrist. Russia explained to the US that NATO's absorption of Ukraine will be a direct threat to Moscow. Zelensky hurried to respond. Not a single country in the world helped Ukraine at the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation, Zelensky said. Other statements. I was not going to go for Russians' ultimatums then, and I'm not going to go for them now. If you did not go for such ultimatums at the most difficult moment, why do we have this feeling that we will go for it now? The EU, to support the war, wants to arrange another meeting. France calls for a second meeting to discuss Ukraine and European security, Reuters. Even though a few hours after the meeting, France, Germany, Poland, Spain, and many other countries stated they would not send their troops to Ukraine, why are they meeting again if no decision is made? All this circus shows how politically in bad shape Europe is. For Putin and Russia, a disagreement between Europe and the USA is the best case scenario, but I don't believe we will see such a scenario. Europe has become completely dependent on the USA. New elections and many of these pro-democrat agents will disappear, making a stronger connection between Trump and Europe. That's why pro-war European liberals are fighting until the end to continue the war in Ukraine and bring more attention to it. These weeks will be the most important weeks in this war because if Trump and Putin indeed meet and diplomacy wins, the pro-war side will have three choices. First, escalate to war with bloody provocation as it did it many times. Second, give up and try to negotiate with Trump so that he won't go after them after the peace. And third, agree to take this financial black hole on their shoulders and hope for two things. Russia will lose or Democrats win an election, so the war can start playing with brighter colors while death will have a banquet in Ukraine.